Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at this pre-built gaming desktop from STGAubron. We're going to go over the specifications of this system, including all the hardware that comes inside of it. We're going to benchmark it, and we're going to talk about some of its pros and cons. But first, we'll show you what it was like to unbox it, and then we'll get into those specifications. We bought this desktop from Amazon for $490. Similar to our last video, our goal in getting this $500 pre-built desktop was to compare it to what you could get if you were to build your own PC for $500 instead. This desktop stood out to us because it came with an Intel Core i5 processor, an AMD Radeon RX 5700 graphics card, and 16 gigabytes of RAM. That seemed like an almost impossible combination for under $500 for a pre-built desktop, but a closer look shows us that the Intel Core i5 processor is the decade-old i5 4590. Just a side note, the Amazon listing here shows that the system comes with an i5 4570, but we can confirm that the system actually came with an i5 4590. And the RX 5700 that comes in this desktop isn't a name brand graphics card from a company like Asus, MSI, or Gigabyte, but instead it is STGAubron's own branded RX 5700. As we saw from the CyberPower PC pre-built desktop we purchased a couple months back, they used a Zotac card, which is a reputable graphics card manufacturer. So there are some concerns on whether or not this STGAubron RX 5700 will perform at the same level as other RX 5700s out there. This graphics card does have an identical fan design as MSI's RX 5700 Mech GPOC card, but it doesn't have a backplate like that MSI card, and the heatsink appears to be a bit different as well. Still, despite some of the potential red flags presented with this system, we decided to go ahead and choose it over other similarly priced desktops because we thought it'd be interesting to see how the older i5 4590 and off-brand 5700 would actually perform. This system also comes with a 512GB SATA SSD, again STGAubron's own branded SSD. It also comes with a mid-tower case that comes with 6 pre-installed RGB fans, and it comes with an RGB Air CPU cooler as well. Its power supply is an unrated 650 watt unit with STGAubron's own branding on it. Again, STGAubron doesn't really have a name in the PSU space, and so there's no way for me to tell if this is a quality unit or not. My guess is that it isn't the greatest power supply in the world. The desktop also comes with a keyboard, mouse, and mouse pad, but these are on the lower side of the quality spectrum. And it has Windows 10 installed on it instead of Windows 11, and the Intel Core i5 4590 isn't on Microsoft's list of supported CPUs for Windows 11. There are workarounds to upgrading to Windows 11 with an unsupported CPU though, but it is an inconvenience nonetheless. Ultimately, there are some serious flaws in the hardware configuration of this system. The older i5 4590 can only accommodate DDR3 memory, and there is no CPU upgrade path available, which is a real downside for a budget-oriented system. If you were looking for a pre-built PC in this price range, it would probably be better to look for something that has a newer CPU in it, even if that meant a downgrade on the GPU, because it would make the CPU upgrade path much better. And either way, the 5700 in this desktop is going to be limited quite a bit by the older 4590, so you wouldn't feel a GPU downgrade quite as much regardless. But again, we thought it would be interesting to see how much the older CPU would hinder the system's performance, and with STGAubron becoming a popular pre-built PC option on Amazon, we'd like to see if their systems are worth it. So let's get into the benchmarks and see how this system performed. In Starfield, the system struggled quite a bit and couldn't even hit an average frame rate of over 35 frames per second on the lowest settings. Tom's Hardware benchmarked a bunch of GPUs in Starfield, including the RX 5700, and they were able to hit just over 50 frames per second on medium settings. They were able to get 40% more performance in their average frame rate and a 75% advantage in their 1% lows in Starfield, but they were using an Intel Core i9 13900K CPU in their test setup. So while the Tom's Hardware benchmark shows that the RX 5700 is definitely capable of running Starfield at least an okay frame rate, the 4590 in this desktop holds it back so much that it makes Starfield basically unplayable. This really isn't a surprise though, as Starfield's minimum requirements call for an Intel Core i7 6800K processor. But the bottom line is that if you're looking for a budget desktop to run Starfield on at least lower settings, this system probably wouldn't be the best option for you. We tested this system on Cyberpunk 2077 at the non-ray tracing ultra, high, medium, and low presets. The system actually produced a decent average frame rate across these settings. It hit nearly 60 frames per second on average on the ultra preset, and it hit over 70 frames per second on the low settings. The game did stutter enough to be annoying though, as marked by the less than ideal 1% lows, and that had a noticeably negative impact on the in-game experience. But still, this demanding game was playable, and I suppose that's not too bad for a $500 pre-built system. We ran the in-game benchmark in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and this PC put up decent results. It was able to achieve 61 frames per second on average at the ultra preset, 69 frames per second at the very high preset, 73 frames per second at the high preset, and all the way up to 88 frames per second on the medium preset. There were some stutters during the benchmark and when playing the game though, so it wasn't the perfect experience overall, but just like with Cyberpunk, AC Valhalla is a fairly demanding title, and surprisingly the combination of the older i5 4590 and the RX 5700 were able to handle it well enough. This system struggled a bit running Palworld, but as we've seen from the $1,000 PC build we put together and the pre-built CyberPower PC Gamer Master we reviewed, it isn't the easiest game to run. That's probably due to the fact that it's still in development and hasn't been as optimized for performance as it could be. But still, the combination of the i5 4590 and the RX 5700 couldn't hit an average of 60 frames per second even on the lowest settings. We would expect results to improve a bit for this system as the game advances further into development, but if you're looking for a PC to run Palworld right now, this desktop probably won't be the best option for you. In our next video, we're going to build a PC for $500 that I think will offer a much better option for Palworld. Definitely check back for that. We also tested this desktop on Baldur's Gate 3. The i5 4590 in this system barely misses the game's minimum CPU requirement of an i5 4690. But the desktop did perform okay on paper, averaging 63 frames per second on ultra settings with 1% lows of 35 FPS and 75 frames per second on the low preset with 1% lows of 47 FPS. However, the game froze a lot on the transitions between running our party around on the map and the interaction cutscenes. It was still playable for the testing, but it probably wouldn't be fun to play through the whole game with the constant freezes. The game did run a lot more smoothly on lower settings, but the overall quality of the images is so bad at the lower settings that lowering your graphics settings isn't that great of an option either. Ultimately, if you're looking for something that can handle Baldur's Gate 3, I wouldn't recommend this desktop. We tested Fortnite at the Epic preset, the Medium preset, and with the Performance preset. On the Epic preset, this system was only able to hit an average frame rate of 37 frames per second with 1% lows of 20 frames per second. But Fortnite is fairly taxing at the Epic preset, and there really aren't a lot of reasons to run the game at that setting. Turning the graphics down to the Medium preset, this desktop was able to average 81 frames per second with 1% lows of 43 FPS. And on the Performance preset, we were able to hit nearly 100 frames per second. So this system was definitely good enough to run Fortnite on a 1080p display with a high enough frame rate for competitive play. We also tested this desktop in a few different non-demanding titles. We ran League of Legends, Rocket League, and Valorant on this build to see how it could handle some popular games that aren't difficult to run. In League of Legends, we were able to maintain over 100 frames per second on maxed out settings for the majority of our matches. The frame rate would dip down to the 70s during bigger team fights, but nothing so drastic that impacted our ability to play the game. In Rocket League, this desktop was able to achieve an average frame rate of well over 250 frames per second, so if you had a higher refresh rate 1080p display, or you wanted to get one, this system would be able to accommodate that for Rocket League. And in Valorant, at max settings, we mostly stayed well above 100 frames per second. So again, another title where this desktop can maintain a high enough frame rate to where you could use a higher refresh rate monitor to give yourself a competitive advantage. Overall, for performance, this STGAubron desktop left a little bit to be desired when running the more demanding titles that we tested. It was able to handle Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Cyberpunk 2077 well enough at lower settings, but it could barely run Starfield, it didn't do great in Palworld, and it couldn't run Baldur's Gate 3 without stuttering issues. Still though, for non-demanding titles like Rocket League, League of Legends, and Valorant, this system provided adequate performance, and if those were the types of games you were looking to play, this PC would work well enough for you. However, the real downside of this desktop is in how difficult it will be to upgrade in the future. Its LGA 1150 socket motherboard locks you into a more than decade-old platform with no great CPU upgrade options available. To upgrade the CPU, you'd also have to upgrade the motherboard and memory, which will be costly and will require you to disassemble the entire system. So while it does handle those less demanding titles fine, there are probably other pre-built options out there that come with the CPU that will be easier to upgrade down the road, and that will still offer good performance in those kinds of titles. In any case, our final verdict on this system is that it's an okay option if you only take performance into consideration, especially if your goal is to play non-demanding titles. But ultimately, we wouldn't recommend it as it has some major flaws, mainly its older CPU, its questionable power supply, and its off-brand graphics card, and because there are better options out there for your money. In fact, if you're willing to build your own PC, for $500 you can put together something that will not only outperform this STGAubron desktop, but will also give you better upgrade paths in the future, and will come with parts from reputable manufacturers. And in our next couple of videos, we're going to do just that. We're going to put together a $500 gaming PC build, we're going to benchmark it, and then we'll compare it to this pre-built desktop. Hopefully we'll be able to show you that building your own PC isn't that difficult, it gives you more performance for your money, and it's a lot of fun to do. So definitely stay tuned for those upcoming videos. Alright, that does it for this review. Thank you all for watching, we hope you found the video helpful, and we'll see you next time.